Bisexuality in media, a look at the relationships between media representation and attitudes towards bisexuality. For my project, I chose to explore the following question. How do media representations of bisexuality affect bisexual women on both the individual and societal levels? Through my research, I developed one overarching hypothesis. The media representation of bisexual women has an impact on society's attitudes towards bisexuality, and a combination of the representations of bisexuality and the attitudes they perpetuate ultimately have the ability to affect the health and well-being of bisexual women. Key terms for this project and presentation include bisexuality, which is the attraction to multiple genders and sexes; biphobia, a series of stigmas, prejudices, microaggressions, or otherwise negative treatment that bisexual people may experience in their day-to-day lives; hypersexualization, to exaggerate the sexuality or sexual aspects of a person or identity. This brings us to our first article, which is called Stereotype Deduction About Bisexual Women, a 2018 study by Alon Zavoni and Tamar Sagai. Zavoni and Sagai created an online survey that was taken by 300 heterosexual U.S. residents. One part of the survey measured attitudes towards other groups, and another had participants measure romantic potential between characters who were said to be on a date. One of the characters presented was a bisexual woman. Knowledge of stereotypes about bisexuality was generally found to be low, but participants still viewed bisexual women less favorably, which brings us to our theory on stereotype acquisition. Zavoni and Sagai wrote, "The gradual acquisition of stereotypes is accompanied by the recognition that they are not personal opinions, but rather widely held beliefs. This means that people acquire stereotypes through exposure. Seeing stereotypes may signal to people that these ideas are widely held beliefs, but they may not recognize that they are stereotypes because these attitudes are presented as truths and not as stereotypes. This means that negative stereotypes about bisexuality may be common in media, but do not necessarily register as stereotypes to viewers. Furthermore, bisexuality is not frequently discussed in media, which makes it easier for any available information to be misconstrued as the truth. A cycle is then created where people create biased content, which perpetuates these biphobic attitudes, thereby leading to the creation of more biased content in the future." This brings us to some of our case evidence. Zavoni and Sagai wrote that bisexuality in women is often considered to be a phase of sexual experimentation among young heterosexual women, or even a call for attention. Thus, it is possible that bisexual women were not evaluated as untrustworthy because they are not perceived as dishonest, but merely experimenting. Media commonly depicts female bisexuality as nothing more than experimentation by heterosexual women and as a way to garner male attention, both of which are untrue assertions and stereotypes. These stereotypes effectively erase the legitimacy of bisexuality for many audiences. Women claiming their bisexuality may struggle to do so because they may find themselves questioning whether this is actually their identity or a way to seek attention, or struggle in finding people who support them. Because bi women are dismissed by media and struggle to speak for themselves, it becomes easier for viewers to ignore bisexual women and the issues they face in society, which is troubling given other trends. This brings us to our second article called "Why Us? Toward an Understanding of Bisexual Women's Vulnerability for and Negative Consequences of Sexual Violence," written by Nicole L. Johnson and Mary Beth Grove in 2017. Bisexual women, unfortunately, face a much higher rate of dating and sexual violence as compared to heterosexual and lesbian women. The authors mention that bisexual women are often excluded from studies regarding dating and sexual violence, or are simply lumped in with lesbian women, which is a problem of its own. The hypersexualization of bisexuality and other biphobic attitudes are both cited as contributors to this horrifying trend. These factors are also cited as complicating the ways in which bisexual women are able to cope following the aftermath of dating and sexual violence. Johnson and Grove write, "The assumption that women's same-sex sexual behavior is solely for men's pleasure perpetuates the hypersexualization of bisexual women, and in turn may increase our vulnerability to sexual victimization." The idea of women being portrayed as sexual objects is not new, but there are women in media who exist outside of the male gaze, whereas bisexual women are almost always portrayed as simply wanting attention. Bisexual women face higher rates of sexual assault, but their representation in media plays a role. Since bi women are depicted as always wanting sex and attention, men may refuse to take bisexual women seriously when they do not consent to sexual activity. Bisexuality is portrayed as consent in media and can lead audiences to assume that bisexuality is equivalent to consent. In the aftermath, bisexual women may be blamed for violence because they are viewed as deserving violence because they wanted attention in the first place. This makes it difficult for these women to find helpful resources or a support system, both of which are vital for the recovery of survivors. Based on the theories and evidence presented, we can draw the following conclusions. We know that bisexual women are stereotyped, creating biases, but due to a lack of information about or realistic portrayals of bisexuality, the stereotypes are generally seen as true. Stereotypes include the idea that bisexual women simply want attention, or that their identity alone is consent. These stereotypes are perpetuating biphobic attitudes, and these attitudes can absolutely put bisexual women at an increased risk for violence, as well as pose obstacles in coping with violence. Realistic representations of bisexuality would educate audiences on what bisexuality actually is and consequently raise awareness of stereotypes, thereby reducing the perpetuation of these stereotypes and potentially reducing the violence against bisexual women.